Welcome, everyone. My name is Maughn Gregory, and I'm directing the Institute for the Advancement of Philosophy for Children, and I want to welcome you all and thank you for being here to our first webinar of the IAPC. We're delighted to have friends and colleagues from all over the world who are joining us this morning. We'll be joined by my friend and colleague, Dr. Jane Laverty from Teachers College at Columbia University. She's been an IAPC Fellow for many years. Today's webinar is in commemoration of the first Philosophy for Children conference that was convened by Matthew Lipman at Montclair State University 50 years ago this month, in 1973. And we're launching this webinar series leading up to the 50th anniversary of the founding of the IAPC in 1974. So I think this is an important moment. I know it is for me personally, and I think it is for many people in the Philosophy for Children global community to think back on the past 50 plus years of what's been happening around the world and see what we can learn and think about what we've learned and about ways that we can go forward together in this important work. So here's our agenda for the hour. We have part A and part B about in equal parts. The first part is just the story of the Institute and the things that have happened, some of the people that have been involved, and we're just going to highlight some of the major accomplishments. And then part B is looking forward in what I think are some important ways that the Institute is going to carry on into the future. So to begin with, I'm going to talk for a little bit about Matthew Lipman, his life before the Institute. This is Matt Lipman. And Matt was born in 1923 in Vineland, New Jersey. I'm just going to highlight a few parts about his life. He attended Stanford when he was in the Army. He was accepted earlier to Michigan State, but his family could not afford the tuition. So his first opportunity to actually attend college was while he was a soldier. This was during World War II. After that, he was able, on the GI Bill, to attend Columbia University as an undergraduate, and he continued there into his graduate studies. He got his doctoral there, and during his studies, he met and corresponded with John Dewey. We have the correspondence between them, the written correspondence. When Matt finished his doctoral degree, he went to Paris as a Fulbright scholar, and he spent 2 years there. And on the boat going over there, he met a young African-American woman named Winona Moore, and they began a romance in Paris, and they were married in Paris, and came back to the United States and started a family. Winona Moore became the first African-American female senator of the state of New Jersey. And she served in that position for 27 years. And when she retired, she was the longest serving New Jersey state senator. And during those 27 years, she was often the only female state senator and sometimes the only Black state senator. So, and these are their children, Karen and Will. So before Matt came to the IAPC, before he came to Montclair, he worked in many different universities and colleges around New York City. At the time when Matt and Winona came back from Paris, marriage between a Black man and a white woman was still illegal in the state of Georgia, where she was from, and in many states, United States. So Matt was really trying to find permanent work in New York City where they could live as a married couple together. He spent almost 20 years as a professor at the College of Pharmacy that was affiliated with Columbia University. These are some photos from his years there. He was first there as a lecturer, and then he was hired as a full-time assistant professor. He was promoted to associate professor and then to full professor, and he was also chair of the general education department. And this slide shows you just some of the, while he was at the College of Pharmacy, he was also teaching at many other universities and colleges around in the New York City area. And you can see here that he was not just teaching philosophy, he was teaching contemporary civilization as part of the core curriculum at Columbia University. He taught in humanities, he taught literature, he taught poetry, logic, he taught music appreciation, he taught many different kinds of things. There were two significant things that happened during these years that sort of started to shift his career toward what he finally ended up in philosophy for children. And one was his correspondence with Hannah Arendt. So in 1959, she published this now famous essay criticizing the United States Supreme Court's decision to desegregate schools in Little Rock, Arkansas. And Matt, among many others, was surprised and kind of shocked and upset about her position on this. And so he wrote a response that ended up not being published, but the publishers sent his response to Arendt, and she wrote a very lengthy response back to him. And Matt says in his autobiography that this was one of the things that started to get him to think about the importance of education and what he might contribute to it. And this is a letter he wrote to her to accompany the position piece that he wrote. The second thing that happened was, you can see here this photo with he's on crutches. He fell on the ice and broke his leg, and he was actually in the hospital for several days. And while he was there, he read Stendhal's novel, The Red and the Black. And this passage is from his autobiography. I'm just going to read it, reflecting on the character of Julian in that novel. He said, "My own agitation, I realized, was related to the thought with which I was much preoccupied in those days, that I too must change my life. Not change some little bit of it, but change it as a whole. It must be understood that I was not despondent over anything. Winona and I were getting along well. I devoted any leftover time I had to working in her campaigns. The kids were a delight, and I enjoyed my own teaching in New York. Nevertheless, I strangely thought, this cannot go on. I must change my life. Things could not go on as they were. Either my life's meanings were the wrong meanings for me, or else my life had no meaning at all. I was unhappy with my happiness. I must make a fresh start." I neurotically continued, but the only fresh beginning I could think of making was to do something more, which would be the downside of a new beginning, but also something different, which would be the upside of such a new beginning. And we all know where that led. So while he was still teaching at the College of Pharmacy, he began, as he says, writing some curricular materials relevant to the teaching of thinking. And these were fictional writings that featured the character that he named Harry Stottlemyre. And as we know, that became his first philosophical novel for children, which was pilot tested with the grant from the NEH. And years later, Matt reflected on the influence of his son, Will, who died of cancer at the age of 24. And so I'll just read this dedication he wrote. "If anyone formed a bridge between the real children of the world and the fictional children who would inhabit the philosophy for children curriculum, it was William, the inquisitive, affectionate 7-year-old who is shown on the cover of this issue of Thinking Journal, as he was 2 years before the curriculum was begun, and who lost his courageous 2-year struggle against cancer in November of 1984 at the age of 24. So Matt, this is how Matt dedicated volume 5 of the journal Thinking to his son, Will. So in 1972, Matt moved to Montclair State College. He was in the Department of Religion and Philosophy, and he began more or less full-time devoting his time to creating philosophy for children. And as I said, in 1973, he convened a conference on pre-college philosophy at Montclair, and this is where he met Margaret Sharp. That was her first year at Montclair. She was hired as a new assistant professor in the Department of Educational Foundations, and she wandered over to this conference to see what was going on and met Matt, and the rest, as we say, is history. This is an ad that was taken out for that conference in '73. So there's Matt and Anne, and now I'm going to ask Megan to continue.
Thank you, Maughn, and welcome everyone. It's a great privilege to be here to be talking about Anne Margaret Sharp's story before the IAPC. So Anne Margaret Sharp was born in 1942 and died in 2010. And she was born in Brooklyn, New York. She was Catholic educated, and her first 2 teaching positions after she received her master's degree in American and Latin American history from the Catholic University of America, was at traditionally Black colleges and universities in North Carolina and then in Virginia. And these positions are pretty important for her evolution because her students were predominantly Black, the faculty was predominantly Black. She learned about racism in the South, and also it was very unusual at the time for a white person, a white woman, to be teaching at a historically Black college and university. And it was really from that moment that her interest in social injustices was established and began to evolve. Here are some early pictures of Anne Sharp, and this is her with her first husband, Vincent. So in 1967, Anne Sharp had another appointment at the Notre Dame College for Women in New Hampshire as the Associate Professor of Humanities and History. And at the time, she and Vincent were house parents at a boarding school, the Hampshire Country School in New Hampshire. And it was a school for boys who had behavioral problems, psychological problems, and their role was to be house parents. At the time, because Anne had this new appointment at the Notre Dame College, she would often come home and be grading papers, and the boys who she invited into their home, into their house on the campus, she had a library in the house, and she would invite them to sit around with her and to grade the papers with her, to share their reflections on the papers and to talk about what they were seeing in the papers. And it was really that time with these boys that taught Anne that, you know, students, young boys had as much to learn from each other as they had to learn from her or any kind of teacher, and also the value of providing young people with resources and then giving them permission to talk about those resources amongst themselves. So she really dates this as the moment for her in which she began to think about the community of inquiry as a valuable pedagogy for teaching young people. Of course, she got her EDD in philosophy of education at the University of Massachusetts, which was on Nietzsche, the philosophy of education of Nietzsche. And her first teaching position, once she had her doctorate as an assistant professor, was at Montclair State College in the Department of Educational Foundations. And it was there that she met Matthew Lipman, specifically at the conference he hosted on pre-college philosophy. I'm going to turn over to Maughn now.
Thanks, Megan. So I'm going to talk just briefly about what we think are really the important innovations that Matt and Anne used in creating philosophy for children, just in terms of their view of philosophy, their view of childhood, and their view of inquiry. So first of all, we think it's significant that they had a shared understanding of philosophy, largely influenced by the pragmatist tradition, as dimensions of the meaning of ordinary experience. And I think people who are familiar with John Dewey's writing will recognize this idea. So even if we just think of the traditional branches of Western philosophy shown here on this slide, they thought of these things, as I say, as dimensions of the meaning of everyone's experience. So that philosophy is not something you need to have a high degree to understand or to have value in your life. Everyone's ordinary day-to-day experience has an ethical dimension. It's got an aesthetic dimension if we're awake to it, a logical dimension. But for Matt and Anne, the really radical thing that they brought to people's attention was that this is just as true for children as it is for adults. So children on the playground, on the school bus, around the dinner table, in their neighborhoods, they have ethical dilemmas all the time. They appreciate beauty and ugliness. They wonder about what's real and about ghosts and personhood. They try to think logically. They feel very strongly about what they think is fair and unfair. So these are philosophical dimensions of children's experience as well. And so, of course, the community of inquiry is a protocol that they developed together that has had tremendous influence really around the world. I think it's maybe the most important idea that they developed together, and it's something they really did develop together. But we think it's interesting that they developed in a slightly different way. So I'm just going to give a little tiny bit of like a little mini history of this idea of the community of inquiry here. So it's really attributed, the idea is attributed to the American philosopher Charles Peirce. But in fact, he did not actually write that phrase, community of inquiry, but he did write about the relationship of community to inquiry in the fields of science and in philosophy. So he wrote, for example, about the scientific communion and the community of philosophers. And then the American philosopher Justus Buckler, who was coincidentally born 23 days before Peirce died, he actually wrote the first extensive study of Peirce's ideas that was published after the publication of Peirce's collected papers. So Peirce's papers were published for the first time in 1931 through 1935. And Buckler had access to those and wrote the first extensive study of those. And that was his doctoral dissertation called Charles Peirce's Empiricism, which is still heavily quoted today by experts on Peirce. And then in 42, Buckler began teaching at Columbia. And in 52, he hired this young graduate student, Matthew Lipman, to teach at the Columbia College of Pharmacy. So Matt Lipman and Justus Buckler were friends and colleagues for many, many years. And Matt said that when he got the idea of philosophy for children, he discussed it with Buckler. Buckler thought it was a great idea. And Buckler was very influential in a number of ways, one of which was that Buckler took this idea of Peirce's of inquiring in a community, and he made a pedagogical turn with it. He thought about it as a way of thinking of class discussion in his university classes, and he wrote this influential article in 1954, What is a Discussion?, that Matt Lipman republished in the first issue of Thinking. And so it was Buckler's idea that you can actually do query. He called it a query, a community of query, but that you could legitimately conduct the kind of query he and Peirce were talking about through talk, just through talking alone, a certain kind of talk, a certain kind of discussion that might happen in a classroom. And then, of course, Matt Lipman and Ann Sharp thought about it among children. But as I say, it's interesting to think about how Matt and Ann theorized and understood this community of inquiry quite differently, actually. So this slide shows you some of the thinkers who were influential on Matt Lipman's conception of the community of inquiry. If you read Lipman on the community of inquiry, he will be quoting these people as among others, but these are the most important influences on Matt's understanding of the community of inquiry. So it includes Peirce, of course, and Buckler, and of course Dewey, but also Socrates and the social psychologist George Herbert Mead and Lev Vygotsky. Peirce was also a big influence on Ann Sharp, and as Megan mentioned, her doctoral dissertation was on Nietzsche, but Ann expanded the idea of the community of inquiry by her readings in ecumenical spirituality and feminist philosophy. And three of her favorite or strongest influences were Simone Weil, Iris Murdoch, and Nell Noddings. And now back to me.
Thanks, Maughn. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the IAPC history. So it was co-founded by Matt and Ann in 1974. And once they co-founded it, they very quickly began teaching 5 to 10 day workshops. Oh, here's a lovely slide of the beginnings of the Institute. You can see on the right-hand side there, the trailer, which is where it all started. And then, of course, they moved to the greenhouse, which will be familiar to many of you. And we've managed to find some newspaper articles on the founding of the Institute. So they immediately moved to teaching these 5 to 10 day workshops, mostly focused on universities on the East Coast, but also the Midwest. They were sort of really wanting to raise the profile of philosophy for children within the States at that point. Here's some more newspaper articles that just indicate the increasing profile, the raising, that the profile of philosophy for children, it was on the rise, and it was gaining the attention of the public media. In 1976, there was a special issue of Meta-Philosophy on philosophy for children, and it was really the first of its kind. It included an essay by Lipman and also the essay by Gareth Matthews on philosophy and children's literature. 1977 marked the publication of Philosophy in the Classroom. It was really the first book on the topic of why we need philosophy in schools and what philosophy in schools should look like. And it's still in print today, published by Temple University Press. And then, of course, they began the teacher education workshops. They started at the Pocono Environmental Education Center in Pennsylvania. But then in 1983, these workshops moved to St. Marguerite's Retreat House in Mendham. And you can see a picture there of some of the attendees and faculty of a recent workshop at Mendham. I think what's noteworthy about Mendham is just that from the very beginning, Matt and Ann had a vision for it as something that teachers would practice with their students, and also that the training at Mendham has been ongoing from its earliest beginnings in 1983. And it's really a place that brought many people from all over the world to the United States to learn about philosophy for children. So it was one way in which they disseminated philosophy for children across the globe. Here are just some delightful photographs of Anne together with Matthew Lipman, one of them being at Mendham, and also a photograph of Anne with Philip Gwynn, her second husband, and someone who was also very active within the Institute, engaged in teacher education. We wanted to just highlight some of the people who have worked at the Institute over the years, because it was very much a team effort. I mean, Anne and Matt were certainly, the founders, and were also assumed a leadership role. But you can see here there were many other faculty and administrators involved. A few other milestones we wanted to highlight is that, in 1979, they began the Thinking Journal, the Journal of Philosophy for Children. The journal was continued until 2014, and it was a very innovative journal because it included photographs, many of them of children, as you can see from the image here, but it also included notes from the field. It included reprints of philosophical essays that Matt judged to be of relevance to the Philosophy for Children movement. It included theoretical and empirical research. It included transcripts of children's dialogue and analysis of that dialogue. So it was a very rich resource for people interested in philosophy for children. And of course, now there are many, many more philosophy for children journals, but at the time, this was certainly early on, it was the only one of its kind. Within the journal, there was a column. It was always on the first page of the issue, and it was called Thinking and Stories. And in that column, Gareth Matthews would include a review of either a child's picture book or some kind of story from the tradition. And he would talk about why he thought the story was philosophical, and he would also indicate how teachers particularly could use the story to engage their students in philosophical inquiry. Yeah, and in 1985, the International Council of Philosophy for Children was formed in Denmark. This is another significant moment in the history of the movement, in part because the movement had really expanded by this point, that it really needed a global organization. And it just also reflected not only the growth of the movement, but also its diversification, given that it had moved to so many countries across the globe. So this organization was formed to serve as an umbrella for much of the work that was happening worldwide. Another significant moment in the history of the movement was the making of Socrates for 6-year-olds. It was produced by the BBC, and it also reflects just how philosophy for children was coming to the attention of the public media, and this became really a resource for so many people over the years who wanted to explain philosophy for children to people who were wondering about what it was. And you see there Catherine McCall and David Kennedy. Another significant moment happened in 2001 when the Institute for the Advancement of Philosophy for Children was awarded the American Philosophical Association Prize for excellence and innovation in philosophy programs. This was an important moment because, the movement had struggled to get the attention of the mainstream philosophical community and to be accepted by the mainstream philosophical community. So this was a moment that really reflected that it had arrived in the context of at least of the American Philosophical Association. And you can see Matt Lipman holding the award, and it was a very important moment for him in the context of his life and career. Finally, I just want to mark that Maughn Gregory became the IAPC Director in 2001 when Matthew Lipman retired. And I just want to read for you what he says about that moment from his autobiography. He says, "It was at this time that I retired as Director of the IAPC. My replacement was a young professor from Montclair State, Maughn Gregory, a choice I thoroughly endorsed and applauded, and still do." So I'm going to turn it over to Maughn now to talk a little bit about the future directions, the present and future directions of the IAPC. Thanks, Maughn.
Thanks, Megan. So I'm going to talk just briefly about a few areas that I consider to be the most important ways in which the IAPC is moving forward. Beginning with the curriculum. So one thing that Matt Lipman and Ann Sharp are well known for is developing this first philosophy curriculum for children, which featured novels, sort of a narrative approach to engaging children in philosophical thinking by writing novels for children and teenagers of various ages. And in these novels, of course, philosophical ideas and concepts are raised, and then the children decide what they want to discuss. And it's significant, I think, that this idea of a curricular philosophical novel, it was innovative at the time. It's still quite innovative, but a number of other people in the world have taken this model and have produced other novels dealing with specific philosophical issues, novels in math and novels in health education, immigration. David Kennedy has just recently published this new one called Dreamers, which is very exciting. We're going to be having a workshop with him about that soon. While a number of people around the world, as Megan indicated, are using children's literature and many other kinds of materials to engage children in philosophy, this notion of using a specifically written curricular philosophical novel, I think, is still important. It's something the IAPC wants to continue supporting. This slide just shows you so far the different languages that the Lipman Sharp curriculum has been translated into, and the countries. So, for example, there are a number of countries that have their own Spanish translations of the novels. And what's significant about that is that every time a novel is translated, Matt insisted that they be culturally adapted. Of course, they were originally written for an American audience, and so there's a lot of American culture featured in the novels. So when they're translated, they're also culturally adapted to the specific place. And the ones here that are highlighted in orange indicate new translations that are happening now that are under contract. So this just shows you that the work of translation and the interest in translating these materials continues, and that's something that we support and encourage. So what we're doing now with this curriculum at the IAPC, I'm very excited about this. We are turning them all into e-publications that will be free on the website very soon. And we have a grant from the American Philosophical Association to take the first one, which is Pixie, that we're working on, and enhance the text for dyslexic and for the visually impaired. And so let me just show you what that looks like. So it's not quite clear here, but you can see that we've numbered the paragraphs instead of each line, so that whether you're reading this novel on an e-reader, or if you've printed your own print PDF version, or there will be an print-on-demand version, the paragraphs will be the same throughout, so that people can refer to them differently. We're using, for example, bold instead of italics. There's quite a number of rules and regulations actually that enhance these texts for the visually impaired, and so that's what we're doing. I'm very excited about that. And as I say, they'll be available for free on the website. And right now we have, as a test, we put up an earlier digital version of Pixie on the web, and I can just show you. These are the places it's been downloaded. The university keeps a dashboard of downloads of IAPC materials, and so far this first one we put up has been very, very popular, and so I'm very eager to get the rest of the curriculum up online. Also, on the Digital Commons site for the IAPC, we're going to be posting, along with each novel, will be the philosophical sources and references. Some of you may have seen that when Matt wrote each novel, he kept track of the philosophical sources for each episode and each chapter in each novel. And so people who are interested in tracing what the influences were can do that. And so we publish all those on the website as well. There have been a number of published reviews when these curriculum titles first came out in philosophical journals and education journals. We'll include those. And there were some research studies actually done on a number of these novels, and so we'll publish those articles as well, and a list of the translations and where they can be obtained. So we're also interested in maybe launching some study groups and practice groups around these novels that would be on online communities that would do these novels together and study them and innovate with them. We are interested in procuring writing grants to support other people in writing new philosophical curriculum. And as I say, we're very engaged in the process of translation and cultural adaptation. All right, next, I want to highlight what we're doing with Thinking in Stories. I'm very excited about this. So here you see again Gareth Matthews, who, as Megan explained, began the column as a column in the Thinking Journal. And this image on the left is the first review that was published in the first volume 1, number 1 of Thinking. And it was Frog and Toad Together, of course, which has become a famous resource in philosophy for children. When Gareth Matthews retired from this column, Dr. Peter Shea at the University of Minnesota took over, and he is still now the chief editor of our Thinking in Stories, which we have made into a weblog. And so that's been getting a lot of traction. I'm very excited about that. And Peter has been able to expand the themes that appear in this column. Really, the growth of children's literature in the last few decades has been really amazing and interesting. Children's literature has become much more sophisticated. It's taking on a lot more controversial issues. It's expecting a lot more critical thinking from children. And so that's very exciting. And Peter's been able to take advantage of that and really expand the weblog in those ways. We're also interested in collaborating with people who are doing this in other countries, who are writing about the philosophy and children's literature from different cultural perspectives, and we really want to collaborate with them. But a very exciting thing we're doing now with Thinking in Stories is we are creating thematic sections. And so the first one that we have created was the one on children in war and displacement. This came about when we were requested by colleagues in Ukraine after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So there were teachers who were organizing philosophy sessions with children both in Ukraine and Ukrainian children in refugee locations, and they were asking us to locate resources that they could use to help children philosophize about their experiences. And so we put a call out to the world, and we were able to put together quite a nice collection of children's books from different countries that help children think about the situation of war and being displaced. And from that, we launched a new initiative, which we're working on right now, on nature, climate change, and climate justice. And so we have a team that is locating books, children's books on these issues, and coming up with categories. And we will soon be putting this on the website as a resource. And as part of that, we are creating a cross-reference list of curriculum discussion plans and exercises from the Lipman Sharp curriculum that will be relevant to the books that we identify in these thematic sections. So this will make it a much more user-friendly resource for teachers and parents. Professional development is another area that we're very excited about and committed to. So the IAPC has always been invested in philosophy in schools, as Megan said, on the model that teachers will be the facilitators of philosophy in their classrooms. And so we have a number of ways that we support that. We do on-site workshops in schools. We collaborate and support people who are running philosophy camps and philosophy clubs in different places. And then, of course, we have our residential course at Mendham, which has been going on in one form or another since '78, but we've been at Mendham for 40 years. We marked the 40th anniversary just this past August. And so this is, Mendham used to be a 3-week adventure, and then it was down to a 2-week adventure when it was associated with graduate programs. And now it's 8 days, but it's 8 wonderful days together. We bring together people from all over the world, beginning and advanced in philosophy for children. And we are innovating with the community of inquiry. So the model that I introduced before of the community of inquiry, we've done quite a bit of work on that, and the IAPC method for that is something we explore and practice quite intensively at this Mendham seminar. So we hope a lot of people will be able to join us there. And then we're also involved in graduate courses. The IAPC formerly was part of Montclair State's program of offering master's and doctoral courses in philosophy for children, and we are bringing some of that back, I'm happy to say. We're starting an online graduate course this spring that will be for credit, and we're also beginning, we have begun online courses, online training courses in the IAPC method, and those will continue. And we are now in the process of organizing mini courses that I'll be announcing soon. Some of these are IAPC standalone courses, and some we collaborate with other organizations like Plato and the Ohio State Center for Ethics and Human Values. Another program that I'm very excited about is the IAPC History and Research Archive. This began many years ago as just my attempt to find what historical records there were around the IAPC and to start to collect them and preserve them. We brought in some experts and did some workshops with our graduate students and our staff and how to do this. And then we've made this quite an extensive project that I'm very excited about. So one of the things, for example, is finding and preserving old editions, like first editions and second editions of the novels of the curriculum. And it's very interesting to sort of compare how they evolved over the years. Like Harry Stottlemyre's Discovery, the first edition is quite different from, I think, the one now is like the fourth edition. And but we've also found a number of unpublished curriculum titles, both stories and full novels by both Matt Lipman and Anne Sharp that we have at the Institute. And we were excited about putting those up online for people to take a look at. And we also want to continue, we've been collecting international curriculum. The Thinking Journal has published a number of philosophical stories from people around the world, and we have several more of those in the archive, and we want to make those available, and we want to continue to network with people who are continuing in that work. Let me just mention that the Thinking Journal, the complete full issues of the Thinking Journal are now already up on the IAPC Digital Commons website for free download. So that was an exciting development. And it's been quite a labor of love to collect and preserve the papers of the scholars who worked at the Institute. First of all, Matt Lipman and Anne Sharp. So just to try to collect everything that they wrote, whether it was published or not published, to organize them and preserve them and make them available for researchers. And we're in the process of doing that. We've done quite a bit. And this includes photos and videos as well. We have quite a bit of videos that we're finding companies that can digitize them for us. And as fast as we digitize them, we'll be putting them up online. And yeah, the digitization project is, of course, time-consuming and money-consuming, but it's something we're very dedicated to. We've had a number of visiting scholars come to the Institute just to access our archives, and a couple of books have been published because of this. And so we want to continue that work, but we realize that it would be much more valuable to make as much of this material as possible available online. So I'm very committed to do that. This bottom photograph is a display that our library did a few years ago. It's another project we've been engaged in. We're trying to collect as many published resources in philosophy for children from all over the world, from many different approaches as we can, and put them in one place. So I believe it's safe to say that the Sprague Library at Montclair State University today has the world's largest collection of theoretical and curriculum materials on philosophy for children. And that's another important resource that visiting scholars are excited about. And even just to have we have a library guide that goes with that, where people can just see what's available, I think is very exciting. Scholarship, of course, has been central to the mission of the IAPC from the very beginning. When Matt Lipman convened that conference 50 years ago this month, it was a scholarly conference. I think that's been one of the strengths and one of the reasons of success of the movement, is that it's the way that it's coupled scholarship with practice in a way that each informs the other. So our scholarship informs our practice, but our practice also has to inform our scholarship. One of the ways that we continue to do this is that the IAPC has an annual symposium at the meetings of the American Philosophical Association Eastern Division every year. And all of these photos on the left are books or special issues of journals that publish the proceedings of these symposia. So this has been quite successful as an avenue to generate new scholarship around philosophy for children. Many of you know that philosophy with children has been a theme now at the World Congress of Philosophy for several years now. And the next World Congress of Philosophy, the 25th, is happening in Rome this August, and the IAPC will be featured there. We have a stream of papers within the Philosophy with Children theme that will be dedicated to looking at the IAPC and its work and its future. And I invite people to participate in that with us. Several years ago, we appointed Dr. Alina Resnitskaya as the Director of Research of the IAPC. She is an educational psychologist who is a professor at Montclair State University. And she came to Montclair State because of her interest in dialogic teaching and philosophy for children as an example of dialogic teaching. And she has done some really important empirical studies, grant funded, on dialogic teaching, the community of inquiry, and philosophy in the classroom. So we're delighted to have her. And people who come to the IPC, particularly with an interest in empirical research, or who write to us with questions about empirical research, Dr. Resnitskaya has been conferring with them, and that's been very successful. A lot of people know that we now have categories of research in philosophy for children included in the philosophypapers.org website. So if you just go to philpapers.org and you search in philosophy for children, you'll see publications in many languages from many parts of the world, and you can search them by keyword. So that's a really important resource. I've mentioned a little bit about the IP History Project, how we're trying to collect documents and photographs and videos of the history of the IPC and its work in different ways. Another part of that is that we've taken on an oral history project where Peter Shea has recorded a number of video interviews with Matt Lipman and Sharp, David Kennedy, many people who were affiliated with the IPC, and also visitors from around the world who have come and talked about their relationship with the IPC. And that's an ongoing project. And now with Zoom, we have expanded that. We are interviewing a lot of other people who have some history and have some stories to share with us. And we've launched a survey to ask people who had some relationship with the IPC to share their stories with us and any documents or photos that they have. And so I'll talk about that in just a minute, how you can be involved in that if you're not already. But I think it's important to say that this is not a hagiography. It's not, we're not just looking to look at the successes and the joyful moments of the IPC history. We're really looking for critical voices. Of course, a number of things the IPC has done and the people at the IPC have done have been controversial, have generated debate, and we think that's very important. This Galley's idea of essentially contested concepts was part of Matt and Anne's understanding of philosophy from the very beginning. And so although we have a particular approach to doing philosophy with children at the IPC, we're very interested in alternative voices and listening to criticism, critical voices, and continuing that discussion. An important kind of evolution that's happened in the history of the IPC is that, as Megan mentioned, the program invited attention from around the world almost from its very beginnings, from its inception. So people from around the world came, studied with Matt and Anne, and when the workshops in the Poconos and Mendham began, that became the main way that people from around the world came and got a really good introduction to philosophy for children. And what happened was, in the beginning, a lot of people from around the world created what were really considered satellite centers of the IAPC. They were sort of like IAP centers elsewhere. And that model worked well for a number of years. But of course, many of those centers began to innovate and do things differently and fitting their own needs. And so we evolved into the model of maybe affiliate centers. So there were a number of centers around the world that were related to the IAPC that had a relationship with us, but they were not really IAPC centers. And that model worked well for a number of years. And then, but today I think it's important to say that what we have is a community that doesn't have any center. We're just a network of places around the world that collaborate together. Some have very different approaches, but we're very interested in different approaches. So I think it's important to neither overstate nor understate the influence of the IAPC on the philosophy for children movement. I have collected some logos from different kinds of programs that we've been involved with in one way or another. But as I say, it's very gratifying to me, and I think it was to Matt and Anne as well, that what we arrived at was this global movement of philosophy for children, where people are doing very different kind of innovative things, culturally specific things. And the IAPC is just very interested to be collaborative and learning from people and sharing what we have. Right, and I'm going to conclude with talking just briefly about how I see the future. So in 50 more years, let's see, the IAPC was founded in 74. And so next year, 2024, will be our 50th anniversary. And what I would like to see 50 years after that. So I'm just going to mention 3 areas. And the first is related to what I was just talking about, the intercultural collaboration. And I want to make the analogy with food culture. In food culture, of course, we have distinctive food cultures in every part of the world, and we have people dedicated to preserving those cultures and also evolving them into the future, but maintaining the distinctness and the preciousness of individual food cultures, while at the same time we have fusion. We have food fusions where we think about the possibilities of what if we fuse this particular food tradition with that one and put them together, what might come about. So I think of that as an analogy with what's happening in philosophy for children. We want to both preserve the distinctive cultural approaches that are happening around the world, but also think about the possibilities of what might happen when we fuse some of them. And I'm thinking particularly in 2 areas. First, in curricula. I think that, as I say, we are, well, I should say, Matt and Anne recognized from the very beginning that the curricular approach, writing intentional curricular philosophical novels, was an important approach to teaching philosophy for children, particularly in its ability to reflect and initiate or invite children into a culturally specific philosophical tradition that informs the world that they live in. And so Matt and Anne tried to do that for the American context and hope that other people would do that for their own contexts. So that's something that we're still committed to. Of course, they invited Gareth Matthews to bring in children's literature to supplement that. And we support that as well. But I think I would hope that in 50 years, that's happening on an even stronger level, that people are writing curricula, different kinds of curricula, stories, novels, and other kinds of things that really reflect their cultural philosophical tradition. And I'm especially interested in indigenous traditions. I just spent some lovely time in Brazil with Walter Cohen, and we spent some time with an indigenous community and learned from them about the importance of indigenous education. And I think philosophy is an important part of that. But also method-wise, the community philosophical inquiry, the way that we preserve that at the IAPC and the way we think about that as a particular practice that comes out of a particular tradition, and we want to preserve that. But we also we're very interested in relating that to other kinds of political and contemplative communal practices. And even at Mendham, the last several years, we have been experimenting with this. We have been devoting a few sessions to different kinds of practices that people can think about in relation to the community of inquiry, including the story circle, Lectio Divina, which is contemplative reading, and mindful movement. All right, the second thing that I would be interested in seeing in 50 more years are innovations in educational philosophy. And here I'm really just thinking about continuing and strengthening trajectories that are already in place. So first of all, philosophy being more generously offered in all schools and all children's spaces. Wherever children gather, there should be opportunities to philosophize. And then also philosophy across the disciplines. This is something, again, that began almost from the beginning of the IAPC. People started to be interested in taking philosophy into the math classroom, into the history classroom, et cetera, the science classroom. And a lot of work is being done with this in many parts of the world. And what I find most maybe exciting about this is that I have this double arrow going both ways. It's that philosophy enriches the disciplines, but it's also that the disciplines can enrich the philosophy. So, for example, we can do philosophy of math. We can look at mathematical concepts that are philosophical, but also we can use math to answer some philosophical questions. So a lot of the questions we pursue in a philosophical inquiry have a mathematical or a scientific or a historical or some other kind of dimension that needs to be explored. And so it is often the case that we can't really get a satisfying answer or move in a productive direction with a philosophical question if we're not able to do some historical research or do some historical inquiry or some scientific inquiry. So combining those, I think, is very exciting. And finally, I'm hoping that philosophy for children will continue to take a critical turn, which I think has been happening just in the last several years. And I see this as very important. And along with this, I see the importance of Anne Sharp's vision of inviting children to be, as she says, good social critics. So to be aware of what's going on in their environment and to become critical of it, and that we provide forums where adults will listen to children's social criticism. So part of that is giving children more agency. This is something that Gareth Matthews wrote about very strongly, and also Matt and Anne, that recognizing children's ability to philosophize is just part of recognizing children's agency and appreciating and honoring their agency to have a voice and to help make decisions in the context of their family, their education, and in political context as well. And I think we're seeing more and more children being able to mount social protest and social criticism on some contemporary issues that really they have a stake in. And finally, it was also Gareth Matthews' idea that children's philosophy should be published and not only read by other children, but by adults and by philosophers. So inviting children's voices into the mainstream philosophical conversation, I think, is something that's very important. And again, on my last trip to Brazil, I stayed with a woman from Colombia, and she showed me some books that they have produced of children's philosophical work that is just the philosophy created by children, and it's been professionally published and illustrated. It's a beautiful thing, and I think a lot more of that needs to happen. And again, not just to be read by children or teachers, but by philosophers. So I want to just end by inviting people to connect with the IAPC. So there are several ways you can do that. Here's the IAPC email address, iapc@montclair.edu. It's very simple. You can write there. We have this Facebook page where we have over 3,000 followers, and that's where we mostly advertise what's going on and opportunities for people to get involved. I also have an email list with about 500 people, and if you'd like to be on that list and you're not already, please just write to IAPC and I'll make sure you get on that list. And then below here, I have just a few of the many ways that people can be involved with us if you'd care to. As I mentioned, we have an IAPC 50th anniversary survey, which is really just asking anyone who is involved with the IAPC as a student or as a visiting scholar or someone who worked with us or just visited. If you have any memories or stories or documents or photos, we would really appreciate it if you'd share that with us. We really would like to do a comprehensive study of our first 50 years that will help us move into the next 50 years. People are invited to write reviews for the Thinking in Stories blog. I invite you to take a look at the blog. And if you've got a children's book that you think would be a good addition to that blog and you'd like to write a review, please let us know. As I mentioned, every year we hold a symposia at the American Philosophical Association meeting of the Eastern Division on the East Coast somewhere. And Megan and I have run a number of these, but we've also invited other people from around the world to use that time to do a symposium on a particular area or idea of philosophy with children that they think is important, that we think is important. So if you've got an idea for that you'd like to do, please contact me. As I say, we have online and residential courses all the time that are really fun, and we would love to have you join us there. And as I also mentioned, curriculum writing, that's something we're very interested in continuing into the future. And so if there's a way that we can help with grant writing or with consultation in writing new curriculum, new philosophical curriculum, we're very eager to do that as well. And that concludes our webinar today. We did not do chat or question and answer because the time was so short, and we have so many people who are with us from around the world, which we really appreciate. So just let me thank you one more time for joining us today, and invite you to be part of the IAPC's future. Thanks very much.